What's up, guys? Welcome to a new episode or a new series. Sorry, I can't turn my volume up. Welcome to a new series that we are doing on the Girlfriendtherapy podcast for the 2023. This is just one series that we're trying to do. I actually had the idea of sharing it a little bit um, over the past several weeks, I guess, in preparation. Let me make sure my phone is off. In preparation for the kickoff. And so there we go. So I wanted to come on and kind of kick off the series. You guys know how I do. I usually kick it off myself first. I'm sorry, looking at my background, I have stuff everywhere. I usually kick off the series myself first, excuse me, and then I kind of share, or I kind of then go into like with my audience and all that stuff, or my guests rather, not my audience, go into with my guests. And so this year for 2023, I have the beautiful idea to do what I'm calling a series on Tell Yourself Your Story. And the idea behind this series is really to look at, is to, kind of interview a guest and just ask them certain simple things about their life and, their story, who they are, where they're from, what their dreams are they pursuing their dreams? Are they living their dreams? Where did their dreams develop? All that wonderful stuff. Who have supported their dreams or encouraged their dreams or, just all that stuff. And I'm sorry, my hair is kind of a little hot right now. And so that's kind of the premise around this Tell Yourself Your Story. So let me just take a step back and before I get too far ahead of myself, you guys may or may not know that along with doing girlfriend therapy ministry and all the other things that fall under that platform, I'm also an author, I'm also an artist and all those lovely things. Although my art is more personal and is more, kind of internal and for me, everything else is kind of things that I do externally. And one of the things that I've done, or outward facing rather, one of the things that I've recently done outward facing is my book, Reflections of a Life Well Lived. Hopefully you guys can see that in the lighting is not too bad for you guys. But in this book, this is actually Reflections of a Life Well Lived, stories, anecdotes, essays, and nuggets. And this book is chock full with stories from my life, different things that I've experienced in life and how those things have, or the lessons I've learned from those things and how those things have shown up in my character, my personality, and the different things that I do now. I started this book when I think when I was turning, well, I don't even know if that's relevant, but I started the book when I was turning 40 or at least the book idea when I was turning 40. And it kind of manifests and morphed into a lot of different things. But ultimately what came out of that was this book, Reflections of a Life Well Lived. And the reason I started it when I was 40, I'll give you guys a really quick backstory. When I was turning 40, typically my husband and I think I was either turning 40 or 45. I can't remember. My husband and I were traveling to a local beach that we love to go to once a year. And we usually go to it around my birthday, which is early October. We usually go to it around that time because, of course, everybody is back at school and things are a little more calm on the beachfront. And so we get to kind of go out and just enjoy ourselves, enjoy one another. We usually stay out there for, several days, maybe even a week even. But this particular year, we were heading out to the beach. And I had just learned of a friend who I went to middle school with who had passed. And when I learned of her passing, of course, I'm like, I'm turning 40 and I'm thinking about my own life. And as I'm getting older and, mortality and all that stuff. And what does it all mean? Have I lived up to my expectations or, the expectations that I have for myself? You guys, I got to turn my fan. Have I lived up to the expectations that I have for myself? Am I doing all the things that I see myself doing? Am I looking like I thought I would look when I turned 40? Is my idea of me matching up to the reality of me was kind of the thing that was going on in my mind. But in addition to that, having learned that my friend who I went to middle school with, having learned that she had passed, and she had passed many, many years before that. She passed like when we were in our early 20s. And I had just, because I didn't grow up in or I moved away from Philadelphia after high school, I didn't hear of her passing until many years later. And so when my friend told me about her passing, I was just like devastated because this was a really good friend from middle school. And I remember my husband and I driving to the beach. Let me relax a little bit because I feel like I'm starting to talk a little fast. I remember my husband and I driving to the beach and I Googled her name. And needless to say, I didn't see anything. Nothing came up with her name. So it was almost like she didn't exist. Now, this particular friend, she grew up, it was her mother, and her brother. Really small family. Her mother, don't really know the backstory on her mother, but what I learned from talking to my other friend was that she had got involved in drugs. Her and her brother both had got really heavy involved in drugs. And, and as a result, her and her brother both passed. I don't know who passed first, but it was within a, small time frame, both of them passed. And, as a result of their, lifestyle dealing with drugs. And I was absolutely devastated. And she was like one of the sweetest people. She was such a dear friend, one of the sweetest people I ever known. And so I share a lot about her in my book. And I knew at that moment, I said, when I write a book, I want to be able to talk about her. I want to put her name in print so that, that if someone read this or Googled her, and maybe her name will come up. I don't know. Maybe it will come up as a reference in my book or something. And so it was really important for me to include her in my book and whatever I was writing. And so as a result of that, that kind of helped to shift the direction that I was going into with regards to this book, Reflections of a Life. It changed the title and all that stuff. So fast forward, finished the book, and, include a really touching and personal story in the book about my friendship with Juanita. But then I also share some other things in the book that are not as endearing, but things that happen. I talk about everything from, I have a chapter here, #MeToo, which of course accounts as a recounting of different situations and scenarios that I found myself in that, were unwarranted sexual advances and things like that. So really personal stuff in there. There's also a story in there where I talk about, dating violence and being in a relationship with someone who was, physically aggressive and abusive. And so that was the first time I ever shared that story. So that's included in the book as well. But then there are a lot of endearing stories. I talk a lot about, being raised and growing up where I grew up or the way that I grew up and where I grew up and, dynamics of my family, not just my immediate family, but my extended family, both my maternal and my paternal side. So there are a lot of really beautiful stories around that. I have a chapter here dedicated to my uncles, which I always say is like the, kind of the underrepresented, family member is the uncle. You rarely hear anybody talk about the uncle and how special they are. And I was blessed to have 5 very special uncles. One of them who's still with us today. The other 4 have passed on and, went on to be with the Lord. So, but it's still a very, very beautiful stories in there. And I share those stories to kind of show like all the things that I experienced and how it's, how it's become a part of who I am at 40, at that point, 40, 45, and now 50. Just how all those different things have come together to make up Kwanza. And so with that in mind, I do know, and I believe without question that we all come from somewhere. We're all going somewhere. I think I share that very quote from my book. And then in this book, there's one of the final chapters is Tell Yourself Your Story. And that is the final chapter of the book. And one of the things, again, the premise is that when we tell our stories to others, sometimes it reminds us of who we are, where we come from, the things that we've accomplished. But I think it also, shares our story with other people for them to be able to see who we are, where we come from, the things that we've accomplished, and how, and then in turn, how they can adopt some of those things for their own, to help encourage them in their own life. And so that really is what the premise of Tell Yourself Your Story is about. Now, I share, like I said, in the book, there's the final chapter, Tell Yourself Your Story, and I share how that title even came to me. I talk about, I was with a friend, and it's funny, it's right there, but I'm not going to reach for it. But I was sharing the story how one day I was at work, and I was, kind of in my own head, and went into the ladies' room and ran into a friend in there who I hadn't seen in a while. And, she, we got to talking about life, very briefly over washing our hands. And she said, sometimes you have to tell yourself your story. And I found that so interesting. But I said, what do you mean? So I kind of leaned in and asked her what she meant. And she, went about talking about how I think she did it through journaling. And she said, she just journal and she talked about the things that she's accomplished, the things that she's wanting to accomplish, the things that, that she's afraid of, the things that she desires to do, like all these different things. She writes down her wins. She, notes her losses or, her lessons. And I just found that so fascinating. So what I ended up doing after that conversation, I actually bought me a scroll and it's right here. I wish I would reach for, but I just don't want to be reaching over everything. But I purchased a scroll, and on that scroll, I drew pictures of myself as a child. I wrote quotes that, inspire and encourage me. I wrote down my different brands. At that time I had First Roots Publishing. Of course, I had the consulting and communications group. Of course, I had Girlfriendtherapy. All the different things that kind of branched off of that. I also created this thing where it's, what is it called? It's like right on the tip of my tongue, guys. I can't think of the name of it, but it was kind of like a tree branch. I wish I could grab, but it's still probably more work than it is. But I drew like this tree branch, and it was kind of like incorruptible seed. And it's kind of like this incorruptible seed, and I drew an image of a seed, and then from that seed, I drew like this branch, this tree, and from that tree, all these different branches, and all those different branches, there was a reflection of everything that's connected to me, whether it's family, whether it's friends. So, for example, I would have me, I would have my husband, I would have our children, I would have my son's fiance, I would have my daughter's, beau, and and it's just like this tree that branches off. And a lot of times I use that to help influence my prayer life and influence, like when I'm making decisions, I kind of take all these people in mind or have all these people in mind. So I took from her idea where she journals it, and I took it and I created this scroll, which is something that I can roll out and look at and remember, and then roll out even further and, add things to it as as my life progressed. Right. So that was something I wrote in the book, something that I did. Fast forward now, 2023, after coming out of a year of conversations, I kind of knew going into 2020 or coming out of 2022 year of conversations, I knew going into 2023 that I wanted to do something that was a little more personal, a little more one-on-one, a little more encouraging, specifically encouraging, and just really kind of just dialoguing about life and people's stories. And so I wanted to do just that. I actually, looking at the structure of storytelling, you guys may or may not know, I am a writer as well. I think I mentioned that. And storytelling is like one of my favorite things to do. Along with writing, I've also had like the Master Storytellers group where I would, go in and we would do stories as a whole thing. Have a Facebook page. Haven't been as active over these past several months, but it was certainly a good part of my brand and a good part of something that I love to do. So to be able to bring that storytelling component along with the growth and therapy component is really exciting to me, because last year I was doing Master Storytelling virtually, and I was doing a year of conversations virtually, and I kind of was, bouncing off with you. So to be able to bring those two together under one kind of activity, I think that's going to be really exciting. So just considering the different elements of a story, when you think about a story, you're talking about your character, you're talking about the plot, you're talking about your settings, your themes, any conflicts that you run into, the dialogue, the climax of a story. There's always an antagonist to a story. There's your audience, and then there's your conclusion. And so when I think about telling yourself your story as a series and as a podcast conversation, the idea is that I would invite someone on the platform. And, I would ask them, when we talk about character, for example, the first question is, well, who is Kwanza? And then they would go about the business of, answering those different questions. Now, I'm still working through some of it, but I wanted to at least create my own story. I wanted to kick off the series with my own story. Of course, you guys can purchase my book and learn a lot more about me, but just kind of off the cuff, I wanted to try to kind of go through this series of telling myself my story. So, I think I answered everything. Like I said, this is just like a kickoff for the beginning, just starting, just a kickoff for the beginning and just starting with myself. So Yeah, I think I answered all the questions. I'm not going to do this like with um, a year of conversations. It's not. I probably do about 12 stories. I'm not going to do a lot. I think I'm going to have 12 women that I want to kind of go through this exchange with of telling yourself your story. And I'm going to, be my first. I guess my first. What is it? My first candidate or first guest. So I'm going to, just wanted to kind of give you guys a preface to let you know what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what the hopes are. But now we're going to kick off with our very first story in this season or this series of Tell Yourself Your Story. So let's see. So my name is Kwanza Falaka. I started going by Kwanza. Um, but this year I am going by Kwanza Falaka. So my full name is Kwanza Falaka. Conwell was my maiden name. Gibson is my married name. I have been married for over 30 years, and I'm a wife. I'm a mother of two adult children. Um, what else? I'm the youngest of four children. My mom and dad had, four of us together, and I'm the youngest of four. Um, if someone was to ask me to describe myself, I would say that I am kind of an introvert, extrovert kind of. Like I get most of my energy by being by myself. Like I get a lot of energy just being by myself. But when I'm by myself, I can store up enough energy that when I'm with people, I can be pretty fun in a crowd. Um, although that's not my preference because I think I'm a lot more, um, I think I like to observe more than I do talking, and people don't often believe that because I am a speaker. But I think the writer in me and the artist in me certainly enjoys observing more than I do engaging. So I would say that I am an introvert, extrovert, probably 50-50. Um, yeah, probably 50-50. Let me see what. Let's see. Yeah. So I'm introvert, extrovert, and I think this would be a story of perseverance. Yeah, story of perseverance. So I am from West Philadelphia, born and raised. I think I may have mentioned that. And I am. It's funny when I think about what industry I'm in because I think I think there are several ways to look at it. And I'm always trying to get to the highest tier of what that industry is. So I think on the highest tier level of an industry, I think the industry that I am in is let me see, because I always have to think about the industry, guys. If I had to say the industry that I am in, I would say arts and entertainment. I think that's probably the industry that I am in. And I say that mainly because as a writer, um, it's in the entertainment industry, right? As an artist, that is in the arts and the entertainment. So I would say for sure I am plugged into the arts and entertainment industry. However, my foundation, or I think my key, whatever that word is communications. I think that I have been created to communicate. I think about the movie Divergent, and I can't think of all of the different sects that they had, sex sects that they had in that movie. But I would definitely be, I think, in is it erudite, 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 I think, erudite, I think. Let me see. I have nothing but time, guys. Let's do this. Divergence. Here we go. Do, 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 do. Yeah. So yeah, it was abnation, which was the selfless, the erudite, which is the intellectual. So I think I would be erudite. The dauntless were the brave, the candor were the honest, and the amity were peaceful. Amity were peaceful. So when I think about that movie, I think for sure I'm more on the because of communications. I think I'm more on the intellectual side because I don't communicate just to communicate. I always feel like I'm communicating to teach something or to learn something or to inspire or something, communicating for a purpose. And then I think I'm really interested in the fundamentals of communications. So, for example, working on my PhD in rhetoric for the sole purpose of teaching rhetoric is, kind of points to that. So when I think about the industry I'm in, I would say that it is arts and entertainment because of the gifts that I get to exercise. But I think my focus more is in the intellectual space. And so, yeah, I think that's the way I would say that. Um, One of the things that I had the beautiful pleasure of doing, and I still have the recording, is talking to my mother. In fact, when I was writing my book, I actually, kind of talked to my mom, talked to aunts, and talked to, people who knew me as a child, and kind of asked the question, how was I as a kid? Like, I have in my mind what kind of kid I was. I always felt that I was, I don't want to say different. I don't know that I really felt that I was different, but I always felt that maybe I was not really quirky. Like, I always felt that I was creative. Um, I always thought that I was very imaginative for sure. Um, Even coming from a family of a lot of people, I often really, really enjoyed the time that I got to spend by myself, even then as a kid. Like, I would make up games from anything. I used to love like the little Scrabble pieces, and I would take the name, like the letter, and they would represent names of people that was like in my life, and I would play with that, as if they were people and creating scenarios and life, you know, challenges or whatever I would do. So I always did that, and I loved it. Um, and so one of the things that, and then I was always really principled too, which is really odd as I think about it. And so in some ways it's really odd because I was a kid and I remember I was just very like just very aware of right and wrong. And I always felt like, but that's not right, and I always felt like, no, it needs to be right. And and even when my principles were misaligned or misguided, I still very much felt like, the world as I understood it, it was the way that it was, and things needed to kind of fit into that in a fair way. Um, and I'm a Libra, so that might that could be a part of that as well. Um, just that the idea of balance. So I've always had that, even as a little girl. That was always something that was really I was very much aware of. In addition to that, I was very loyal, I think, to friendships and relationships, and very respectful, I believe, of friendships and relationships. Like, those things meant a lot to me. And as I got older, I didn't always do right in that area, but they always still meant a lot to me. In fact, I will say without question, I've always felt the most like myself, and walk most powerfully in myself when I was being honest and principled and all that wonderful stuff, because that's innately my character, my personality. I think sometimes it can rub people the wrong way, but I think that definitely is innately who I am. And then I find that people aren't always used to that. So when I am kind of coming from that space, people sometimes are kind of like, what's wrong? Why are you doing that? Or why are you? People kind of look at it kind of like suspicious. But honestly, I think the things about me as a child that still shows up for me today is my loyalty, is my idea of principle, um, is this idea of fairness, my creativity, my desire to kind of, I guess, that introvert extrovert kind of thing is still very much a part of me. And I remember interviewing my mom while I was writing this book, and she said something. She was like, "Yeah, you never really had to be around a lot of people. Um, you were always really cool just being by yourself." And I think that's another thing that's really kind of really still stands out with me, is that I'm fine with being by myself. What are your points of pressure? People, places, or things? people for sure is always a point of pressure for me. And I think that goes back to just this idea of being principled and expecting people to act the way that you would want them to act. Like I am habitually disappointed in people, which is weird, but I am. And I'm always like, you got to do it right. It's just something about that just always sticks with me. But I remember a good friend of mine, brother in the faith, who reminded me, he said, people are not your, issue, they're your ministry. And understanding, again, as a communicator, who are you communicating to if you're not communicating to people? And what are you communicating to people if you don't understand people? How can I write? How can I do anything if I don't study people, if I don't understand people? And so people can't be, the thing that I want to turn off and get away from. And then I think the beautiful thing is, using the word conflict or even pressure, is when you think about conflict or pressure, it doesn't necessarily have to be something negative. Like pressure, how do you say pressure, produces diamonds, right? Conflict, gives opportunity for discussion and dialogue and resolution. So neither one of those words have to be anything negative. I always think about that Martin, and I say this all the time whenever I think about this or whenever I'm asked a question similar to this. But I always think about that Martin Lawrence episode when he was talking to Gina. He's like, people make me mad, Gina. That is like the funniest line ever. And I say that all the time. And every time I say it, I crack myself up. So I think a point for me of conflict or a point for me of pressure is for sure people. Yeah, definitely people. But again, it doesn't have to be a negative thing. It's certainly one of those things that keep me on my toes and one of those things that for sure keeps me engaged or, challenges me the most. I think it's this people. Dialogue. What does my internal voice say to me? One of the things that I say all the time is when I'm having this constant internal talk, right? This self-talk that is constant for me is, are you okay? Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? What are you thinking? How are you feeling? So there's this one part of me that's always checking in with me to make sure that I'm okay, to understand why I'm feeling what I'm feeling, because sometimes I can get like really caught up in an emotion and I'm trying to work through it. Like I could be working on something and a phone could ring and something had happened. Like true story, I can be say I'm working on something, right? My phone rings. I answer it without really looking. It's a telemarketer or some scam person calling and I, hang up on them or whatever. But then my spirit is like disturbed and I'm just annoyed. And then I have to pause and, and it's like, oh, because that call that came in was a scammer. And so I kind of have to do this real life release of that thing and that energy that came with that thing. And so a lot of that is really always me checking in with myself. Another part of me always checking in with myself, especially if you're doing business or if you're trying to build a brand or do the work of ministry, there are a lot of times where I have to kind of check in with myself to say, okay, like, what are you doing, right? Does it make sense? Who told you to do that? How does that align with what the bigger picture is? And so I have this, often have this internal kind of thing that's going on as well. Another thing I'll tell you, one of the things I think people would be surprised to hear about me, or maybe not, is that I do get insecure about things. I get sometimes, especially when I'm not on my A game, I get incredibly indecisive. Like if I am grieving or mourning or I'm wounded or like, anything that's happening, I really lose my ability to make decisions. So I get kind of unsure about myself and my ability to make good decisions. Like if I'm really going through something, or even if, I get kind of unsure about myself and my ability to make good decisions. Like if I'm really going through something, or even if, or even if like those moments when I'm just really not sure about it, like life. So I think I started talking about like with people, I get really, um, I get really, I guess tuned into people and what they're doing and why they're doing what they're doing. And sometimes that can disrupt my, like I said, disrupt my peace. And when my peace is disrupted in that way, and it can be something very, very simple. Um, like for example, I just heard, what was it? I was just listening to the other day, and it was like really brief. Oh, the rapper, oh God, what is her name? Was it Gangsta Boo? I just learned the other day that she had passed. And when I, scrolling through YouTube and it said that she had passed, and I was like, oh my God, like I remember just seeing her on a television reality series. And I was just like, oh my God, because I didn't know her. I just literally knew her from that television reality series. And so when I heard that she passed, I was like, wow, that's crazy. And then I read another, I didn't even read it. I scrolled up a little bit further. And then another headline, talked about her passing. And it said that she was found on her porch dead. And that disturbed me. Um, like that was very, very disturbing. And it was like, oh, her porch dead. Like, what does that mean? So I remember just spending like time, with that, processing that in my head. Like, what does that mean? You know, and then thinking about what that means, like for her family and who found her and all that stuff. And I talk a lot about that. I think my relationship with death, but my experience with regards to death, especially, um, death in a bizarre way. So I have a chapter in here where I talk about more people, more portals again, talking about people. But the idea, even with that, is that, the more people that you are in contact with or have access to, the more opportunity there is, not only for good stuff to happen, right? But there's more opportunity for negative things and hurtful things and all that stuff. I share about coming from a huge family. The crazy thing about coming from a large family is that, when people start passing, it can get overwhelming. Um, and so that's a part of the people part. But what that looks like in terms of the internal conversations that I have, or the voices that are in my head, if you will, those voices are always checking in with me. Like there's this internal part of me that is such a nurturer. And I'm grateful because I not only look to nurture those outside of me, but I also really, try to be in tune enough to nurture myself. And so when things happen at a rate that is too fast for me to process sometimes, I can feel a little off kiltered. And when I feel off kiltered, I have a hard time making decisions, and then sometimes I just kind of withdraw as well. I will shut everything down, cut off my computer. If I turn off my computer, it's like serious business. I turn off my computer, I'll sit on a couch and I'll binge watch Girlfriends or Seinfeld or something that I have seen a million times, because I don't really have to be in it, right? I can just kind of aimlessly listen, and just kind of, how do you say, veg out, or mindless TV or whatever that is. So the dialogue in my head is often either encouraging me, checking in on me. I don't very often praise God. And even when I do, it's like, what was that? I don't really have a lot of negative self-talk. And when I do, it is so abnormal and so bizarre that everything else in me stands up like, what, wait a minute. And so there's that quick internal self check, right? Okay, well, you're saying I can't do this. Why do you think you can't do that? So I'm always like problem solution, even within myself. So the internal talk or internal dialogue is like, you're not good enough, you can't do that. Or you're not smart enough, you can't do that. Everything else in me kind of rises up and like, okay, wait a minute. Why do you think you're not good enough? Why do you think you're not smart enough? So I start trying to solve that. So that's like kind of my internal dialogue, is constantly, having those conversations. So with every story, right, there's the climax. There's this important part of the story that kind of shifts or pivots, a point of pivot for me. And I really have to talk in order to really kind of capture that point of pivot. I mean, there are also moments of that, right? There are times, there's not just like one pivot and that's it. But there are moments where you're constantly shifting and pivoting. But I'll tell you, one of the biggest pivots for me, I think, was going into the military. And I can even talk about the story leading up to me going into the military, which was under the advice of an uncle. And so going into the military was a huge pivot for me because, again, being the youngest of 4 children, growing up in West Philadelphia, had never left home, had never gone outside of, or rarely have gone outside of the 20 block radius, right, of my community. And then to join the military at 17, my parents had assigned for me to go on. First place I went was Fort McClellan, Alabama, right? So imagine 17-year-old Buffy at the time, because I still was in my childhood mindset, 17-year-old Buffy going into the military. And I think I shared this in the book, but I I remember going into the military, and one of the things that you have to do is like they do your paperwork, and they say, okay, sign your paperwork, right? Because however you sign this is how you will sign for the rest of your life. I don't know who told me that, but one of the people that was processing it said that. And so all my life growing up until that point, everybody called me Buffy. When I went to school, of course, the teachers would call me Kwanza, but nobody else called me that. And they really just kind of did that to check roll. But nobody else called me that. And so now here I am in this professional setting, and now I'm having to establish who I am, which I tell a really amazing story about that as well, because again, a lot of times we don't think of who we are outside of the context of where we grew up. And so even at the beginning, when I'm like, oh, Kwanza, I'm the youngest of 4, I'm a wife, I'm a mother. So we start like defining ourselves within these boxes, right? That's been created for us, whether through your order, your birth order, or where you fall within a family dynamics. And so now, fast forward 17 in the military, having to sign this paper. And now it's like, okay, who am I? Who is this person? And so I signed my name for the very first time that I could remember, Kwanza F. Conwell, and I had been that for many, many, many years. Like I said, this year, I'm just kind of saying, okay, Kwanza Falaka. And so that's why I was Kwanza F. Conwell. So when I got married, Kwanza F. Gibson. So the point of pivot for me was just that, going out of the structure of growing up in my family dynamics that, was created in West Philadelphia, and to now becoming my own person, being hundreds of miles away from home. I went from Fort McClellan, Alabama to Fort Lee, Virginia, and having those different experiences, both in Alabama, as well as the experiences that I had in Virginia. It was in Virginia that I, was in this dating violence situation. So having that experience and now tagging that into like trying to figure out who I am. I think I shared even in my book, the last time that this person that I was dating, the last time that there was a physical altercation, I remember looking at myself in the mirror and thinking, oh, is this my life? And having to make that decision. Now, at this point, I was probably 18, but imagine having to make that decision at 18, and then having to lean on and yield to all of this other stuff that was in me, this, are you okay? And, this problem solution kind of person that I've always been. So that was a really pivotal moment, just going into the military and experiencing different things that I'd experienced, because that was really at the point where I began to build up who I saw myself as a person. Yeah, that's really just kind of building up and becoming the person that I saw myself. And like I said, even growing up, I've always thought that I'd be a writer, to some regard. And another point of pivot was when I wrote and published my first book. That was huge for me. And I remember having my book released and having family come out and everybody coming out and so incredibly happy and supportive and proud and all that wonderful stuff. And I remember the next morning I woke up and I was just so incredibly proud of myself and so incredibly grateful for being able to accomplish this thing that I had desired for myself even as a small girl. Being able to accomplish that was just absolutely incredible. And so that too was a point of pivot, but then it showed me that everything that I dreamed of as a little girl that I can actually accomplish, I can actually do. Um, and in most stories, there's, the antagonist, right? And the antagonist for me was, I think, the idea that I was behind. Like, I would watch people who were doing the thing that I desired to do. Like, one of the things I always wanted to do, and, still not too late, but one of the things I always wanted to do is not just write, but write for film and television. And so I would watch people who were, out there doing it, and I would be so, I would be inspired, but I would be envious as well. Man, I wish I was doing that. I would hear people's testimonies and their stories about, like, I just watched this thing recently, Sally Richardson, and she was sharing how she got in the business of directing. And I'm just like, oh my, like, I love her story so much. And it was so inspiring, but still there's always this part of me like, I wish I was doing it. And so I'm constantly having that conversation with myself as well. It's like, no, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing in the way that you're supposed to be doing it. And I don't know, it's not too late to not, too late to do that. I can still very much become a writer for television and movies. I could still very much become a producer and a director and all that stuff that I desire to be. It's not too late. And, God willing, and the levees don't break, I can certainly get a chance to do that. So I think the antagonist for me is always fighting with, is it too late? I remember I had a friend years ago, rest in peace, she had wrote a book about, a dream deferred or something to that effect. And she talked about how, when you get to the point where you realize like there are some dreams that you have to put down, right? And I always found that to be really interesting. But gratefully and fortunately, I don't think that the dreams that I have are dreams that I have to put down just yet. I can still pursue them and still, keep them as dreams that I want to dream or pursue rather. My audience, excuse me, I think my audience is always me first. Because I think I am my biggest cheerleader, but I can also be my biggest critic. Because I think sometimes, you kind of feel like, is it good enough? Did I do it right? Could I have done it better? Like everything that I look at, I'm always panicking at that. But I'm grateful that I don't allow the idea of I could do it better to stop me from doing what I can do when I'm doing it. So I remember, for example, when I did my first Girlfriendtherapy conference, I remember someone, God said, do it. And, in October, I got the green light. And in March, we were having our first conference. And it wasn't perfect, right? I always go back and I can even go back to that video. And I remember like my husband was recording and someone walked up to to him and asked him if he could turn up the volume. And so there's always that voice on the recording while he's, recording. It's like, can you turn it up a little bit? So that always is like, but it didn't have to be perfect. And I remember after knowing that someone who I guess offered a bit of criticism and said that, I would have done it if it wasn't perfect. And it's like, and needless to say, it took them many, many, many years later before they had even branched out or even tried to attempt to do a women's conference. So, and that still wasn't perfect. So how to say perfect is the enemy to success. Is that the way that quote goes? But yeah, so my audience is for sure myself. First, I think anybody that have influence over or, influence on their lives. My husband is my audience, I think, because the fact that he believes in me to be able to do something and he supports it and he invests in it, that, for me is kind of like who I do it for. If that's the right way to say audience, is who I do it for. And then I do it for the people that I don't know, the little girl that, identifies with me, the little girl that's in me, that still lives in me, that still dreams and that still, wants to experience. So a lot of the stuff that I do is for sure is for me first, the little girl within me. It's for my husband, my children, and anybody else who looks to me as a friend or a mentor or an example or whatever it is. I think that is my audience first and foremost. Yeah, that's my audience first and foremost. So every good story has a conclusion. And although I believe that I have many, 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 many years to go, I am believing God for 102 years. And if that's the case, I am just halfway there at 51. But if I had a conclusion, and with this, it's funny because I'm thinking a conclusion in under 10 words, not including the end. I would say that my concluding sentence would be, let's see, and she fulfilled her purpose and left nothing undone. Yeah. She fulfilled her purpose and left nothing undone. I think that's more than 10 words. She fulfilled her purpose and left nothing undone. Oh, 9 words. Yeah, and so that was my first story. I really enjoyed it. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. This is kind of the premise of tell yourself your story. Of course, as you're listening to the story, as I'm even telling the story and thinking about the different things that inspire me and concern me and point to pivot and all that stuff, the things that I still desire to do and still dream about. Just telling that story, if you can feel like just the joy and the excitement that I have on the inside, just being reminded that I am here, that I come from somewhere, that I'm going somewhere, that I have life within me, that I am still very much vibrant and excited about life. And then even sometimes when you're not so vibrant or excited about life, having those conversations, telling yourself your story can help you to re-engage with that vibrant part of who you are. I often look at people sometimes and I wonder how they got to be who they are. I know I've seen people who have lost their fervor, who have lost their passion, lost their desire. There are even times in my life where I feel like, I may, where I have been hit by life so hard that I wonder, man, am I going to bounce back from this, or is this going to be the thing that causes me to lose my passion or lose my fervor? And I'm so grateful to God that even in the midst of life's ups and downs and its circumstances and its challenges, I'm grateful to God that I can still say that I'm excited about life. I think about the thing, two things can be true at the same time. Life can be difficult and it can be beautiful. So thank you guys so much. Hopefully you will enjoy this series. Thank you in advance to everyone who will be a guest and come on and kind of go through this drill with me and share their story, tell themselves their story, and also share their stories with you guys. So blessings to you all. Thank you again for tuning in. And until next time, blessings.